Hello, class. I'm going over today Chapter 11 in the Introduction to Healthcare Costs, and today's chapter is titled Environmental Safety. Now, being safe in an environment is one thing. It's a concept that, yes, we must remain safe. But when you're in a healthcare environment, there's a whole lot of other issues because not that it's an especially hazardous environment, but there's so many elements in this environment that does make it especially hazardous. So let's take a look at how this chapter is laid out. So when you read it, you'll have an idea of what you're going to be covered. The first aspect of what this chapter goes over is the importance of environmental safety in healthcare. And one of the sentences reads, "The healthcare professional must understand and follow workplace safety policies and procedures that reduce hazards and prevent accidents and know how to handle incidents correctly if they occur." So that's the goal of this whole chapter. Not only that you as a healthcare worker becomes knowledgeable as to be able to identify the different hazards, but to know how to act correctly when you find yourself in these environments. So the first aspect that they want to go over and introduce you to in this chapter is going to be the general safety guidelines. And some of those guidelines are going to be, how do you move safely in a healthcare environment, a healthcare facility, a doctor's office, a hospital? Just an example of one of the movements that they're suggesting is that you never run, okay? The next safety recommendation would be, how do you dress in a healthcare environment? Okay, things like don't wear dangling earrings down to here. That would be an example of a guideline. How do you work safely with patients is covered as well. There's a wonderful table on page 269, table 11-1, where it lists for you in a very easy way to look at it, all the different types of healthcare hazards. So are they going to be chemical? Are they going to be workplace violence? Are they going to be infectious? Are they going to be environmental? And these are all on that table, really easy to read. On the next page has a wonderful table, table 11-2, and that's going to go over physical and mental changes that increase the risk of injuries and accidents. Things such as, how do changes in vision affect your risk? How do changes in blood vessels affect risk? How does taking medications affect your risk for working in a healthcare environment? How does it put you at risk? All right. For example, some medications make you drowsy. That would definitely increase your risk for handling sharp objects, for example. Next, it'll cover, how do you protect yourself and others in this healthcare environment? And then, how do you report for safety? I once worked in an office. When I first started, I noticed there was a very big hole in the carpet as soon as you walked in. And I labeled it as a trip hazard. And if anybody tripped and fell, they would sue us. It was a $200 repair, didn't cost a lot of money, but I went and reported it because I knew that eventually someone was going to trip. And so that's what you would do. If you see safety issues, safety hazards, it's really your responsibility to report it, not to say, oh yeah, I saw that, or yeah, I knew that was like that for a long time. It's not what we want you to do. Okay, the next topic that they cover in this chapter, which I hope that none of you ever have to witness it. I certainly never have, thank goodness, but I've seen it on the news. And it's this whole article of workplace violence. Things happen in the workplace that might trigger violence in people. Examples would be when you fire somebody. That's a totally volatile situation. Another thing might be if you have two employees that just for whatever reason don't get along and they erupt into like a fist fight or a hair-pulling, screaming fight. This is what we mean by workplace violence. And so on page 273, they lay out a wonderful table 11-3, and it tells you as an employer what your responsibilities would be. as an employee, what your responsibilities are in identifying workplace violence and then correctly acting once you do discover it. It moves on, this chapter, to what we call fire and electrical hazards. And on page 274, of course, the fire hazards are the one thing that we all fear. So it really goes through, they do give you an acronym called RACE. And RACE stands for remove the patients, activate the alarm, contain the fire, and extinguish the fire or evacuate, RACE. But the most important instrument in our work environment is a fire extinguisher. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to inspect a practice and found that their fire extinguishers were empty or they hadn't been inspected in like a year. So somebody has to keep up on that and make sure that that fire extinguisher is available if and when you need it. On page 275, they give you a wonderful table. These tables are worth so much because it's easy just to visualize and look at them, read the material, zero right in on the information that you need. It's not in a text that goes on and on and on and on. It's in columns, it's in sections. That's why I really do point out and like these tables. But this table on 275 tells you the different types of fires and how to extinguish them. You're going to extinguish a paper fire one way, and you're going to extinguish a chemical fire another way, and an electrical fire another way. You're not going to throw water on a wire that's sparking. That's not how you do it. So this is a wonderful table so that you know what you're doing, correctly handling the situation. And then on page 276, that table tells you everything, what to do when you discover a fire. And it lays it all out for you. It's also the acronym RACE, but it gives us a lot more detail. The guideline to do something, and then the rationale. Why are you doing it? All right? Moving on, the next section is going to cover the chemical hazards. Depending on where you work in a healthcare environment, you may come across chemicals. The issue with chemicals is, should it spill on you, splash on you? Do you just run and rinse yourself off with water? What do you do? So that's why we have all these different precautions to do in a chemical hazard situation. We have radiation hazard situations, okay? I one time worked in radiology, and everybody there walked around with this little badge that absorbed radiation, and once a week we had to turn in those badges so someone could read and be sure that we weren't being exposed to too much radiation. Each one of us had our name on that badge, and if it was too high, then we were told that we had to, change where we were. Don't go in a room a certain amount of time, or limit how often we were in a room. All right, infectious waste simply means, where do you throw out certain things? Needles have their own container, but where do gloves go after you take them off your hand? After you've swabbed infected sites, bleeding sites, you just take that cotton, that gauze pad, and throw it in the regular garbage, or is there an infectious waste garbage? The answer is yes, there's an infectious waste garbage, and you have to separate where you're throwing your lunch garbage from where you're throwing your gauze garbage, okay? Also, there is oxygen hazard. It's not so much of a problem anymore, but years ago, people used to smoke in the hospital where the oxygen was, and oxygen is extremely flammable. So that's what we worry about with oxygen. We don't worry so much about smoking because people don't smoke in hospitals anymore, but there are sparks. Anything that could cause that oxygen to explode is an issue. It's a safety issue. Okay, the chapter moves on to something that we really are only, considering 20 years now, and that's the whole idea of bioterrorism. I lived in New York, and we lived with it every single day, especially after the September 11th attacks in New York City. But everybody's a target. Everywhere is a target. And so we have to be aware, understand how how are we going to react? Not even so much how we're going to react, but we're going to be guided to do certain things, and we have to know how to do them. Okay? In the hospital, anybody who's worked in a hospital hears all the time code blue, code red, code pink, code gray. This next section identifies this emergency code system. And after a while, you get familiar with what they are. So they absolutely lay all that out as well. Emergency preparedness plan. I've always worked in hospitals, and they were always doing drills. For example, where I worked in one hospital, we were very close to some major highways and a train system. So we were always anticipating that what if the train crashed and went off the track and there were thousands of people. You have to be prepared for this. You have to anticipate that something awful is going to happen. We were also not far from an airport. What if a plane went down? So we were always playing through those scenarios. One thing I think that most people don't realize, no matter what you do, if you work in a hospital and it's a severe enough emergency, like on September 11th, you cannot go home. You just can't pick up and say, well, okay, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going home. Everyone in the hospital is kind of held in place in case they need to be utilized and cross-trained to do something else. So as an administrator, maybe they needed me in the kitchen on that day. So I would go into the kitchen and do whatever they needed. Maybe they needed me to make beds. Maybe they needed me to help out in the laundry. But all hands on deck, everybody has a purpose in a bad enough emergency. And so that's something else to consider when you consider a healthcare situation. Everybody from my home was calling me saying, come home, come home, come home. But my employer was telling me, you have to stay here. We may need you. And finally, the chapter ends with this whole concept of triage. So what if you do have a train wreck with 1,000 people and you only have a limited amount of staff and resources to take care of those people? It may sound heartless, but you're going to look among the people and categorize them. Who is still able to be saved? Who cannot be saved? Who is beyond being saved? That process of categorizing your patients is called, is called triaging your patients. Okay, and that's really important to know. If any of you have gone to the emergency room, you see them doing it when you first go in. They call you in, they ask you what's going on with you, and then they put you in order. Someone who's coming in with chest pains is certainly going to be looked at sooner than someone who says, I think I have the flu, or I think I have a cold, or my throat is bothering me. So that's an example of triaging. This is a very important chapter as well. I mean, you need, when you go to work, to be safe in your environment. So there's a lot of, once again, very helpful information that you can take away and use in your private life or pass along to people in your family. So once again, this is the overview for chapter 11. Enjoy reading the chapter, and I'll see you again next session. Bye-bye.